The minivan, a veritable cathedral of suburban life, hummed a familiar, metallic lullaby as it ate up the miles of sun-bleached asphalt. Inside, the atmosphere was a carefully curated portrait of the ideal family road trip, a scene so pristine it could have been lifted from a glossy magazine advertisement. The air conditioning fought a valiant and ultimately successful battle against the oppressive heat outside, maintaining a perfect climate-controlled bubble. The scent of leftover fast food fries, synthetic air freshener shaped like a pine tree, and the waxy promise of new coloring books created a uniquely road trip perfume. This was our normal. This was our routine. From the driver's seat, my husband, Mark, was the picture of relaxed competence. One hand rested lightly on the wheel, the other adjusting the radio dial, skipping past static-filled sermons and twangy country songs until he found a classic rock station playing something by the Eagles. He tapped his fingers on the leather steering wheel in time with the beat, a faint, easy smile playing on his lips. He'd suggested this trip, a spontaneous long weekend to visit a state park he'd read about, a chance to unplug and reconnect. He had been so enthusiastic, so convincingly normal, that any lingering reservations I'd had about the expense or the timing were swept away by his contagious cheer. He was, in that moment, the man I had married. Solid, dependable, and charmingly eager for a family adventure. In the middle row, our two children, Lily, age 7, and Ben, age 5, were lost in their own worlds. Lily, with headphones on, was utterly engrossed in a movie on the seatback screen, her eyes wide and unblinking, a silent spectator to animated adventures. Ben was fiercely concentrating, his small tongue peeking out from the corner of his mouth as he attempted to stay within the lines of a superhero coloring book. A soft mound of crayons, some broken, some whole, lay nestled in the seat beside him. Occasional, peaceful squabbles would break out. A disputed crayon, an elbow straying into personal space, but they were the minor, manageable conflicts of childhood, quickly settled by a few firm words from the front. My role was that of co-pilot and chief operations officer. I navigated, I passed back snacks of apple slices and goldfish crackers, I resolved disputes, and I pointed out interesting landmarks. A peculiar cloud formation, a field full of grazing cows, to momentarily pull small eyes away from their screens. I felt a warm, deep-seated contentment, the kind that comes from seeing your family happy and together. The road stretched out before us, a straight, unwavering line of possibility. The vacation ahead promised campfires, s'mores, hiking trails, and the kind of uncomplicated joy that forms the bedrock of childhood memories. There was no foreshadowing, no sense of impending dread. The sky was a brilliant, untroubled blue, and the world outside our windows was just a scenic backdrop rolling past at 65 miles per hour. We were insulated, protected in our mobile capsule of normalcy, utterly oblivious to the fact that this perfect tableau was nothing more than a beautifully maintained facade, and that the man steering us so confidently down the highway was navigating not just by GPS, but by the silent, screaming coordinates of a past he had desperately tried to outrun. The tranquility was absolute, and it was a lie. The first fissure in our perfect day was a small, biological inevitability, the pressing need for a restroom. It began as a minor discomfort, a dull insistence that I, as an adult, could easily ignore. I shifted in the plush passenger seat, focusing on the hypnotic rhythm of the lane dividers whipping past. Just another 20 miles, I told myself, surely there will be a nicer, cleaner place then. The children were quiet, Mark was content, and I was reluctant to break the spell. But biology is a persistent master. The discomfort grew from a suggestion to a demand. Across the van, a small voice echoed my own internal plea. It was Lily. She pulled one headphone away from her ear, the tinny sound of her movie escaping into the car. "Mommy?" she asked, her voice pitched with that specific brand of childhood urgency. "I really have to go." Like, really? It was the permission I needed. "Me too, sweetie," I said, offering her a sympathetic smile. I turned to Mark, my hand resting lightly on his forearm. "Okay, navigator, time to find us the next exit. My bladder is about to stage a mutiny." Mark's easygoing smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "There's probably a better one in the next town," he said, his eyes never leaving the road. His tone was light, but it carried a strange, new undercurrent, a hint of dismissal that felt out of place. "Mark, she's got to go now," I said, my tone gently teasing but firm. "We're not asking for a 5-star spa, just a semi-clean bathroom. I promise we'll be in and out in 3 minutes flat. Look, there's a sign. Gas, food, next exit." "Perfect." I pointed ahead at a standard green highway sign. It listed a single gas station brand, a generic fast food logo, and the promise of lodging. It was the kind of exit you see 1,000 times on 1,000 trips. Utterly anonymous, utterly functional. The very definition of a pit stop. He didn't answer immediately. His knuckles, I noticed, had tightened on the steering wheel, the skin stretching white over the bone. The easy tap of his fingers to the music had stopped. He was calculating something, his mind working behind a suddenly stoic mask. "It's just a quick stop, honey," I pressed, my own need making me slightly impatient. "We'll get some more snacks for the kids, use the restroom, and be back on the road. It's not a big deal." The exit ramp was approaching, a curved off-ramp beckoning us toward relief and normalcy. The turn signal began its steady, rhythmic click, 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 a sound I'd later come to associate with the moment our world fractured. It was Mark who had activated it. He'd surrendered to the request, but the action seemed robotic, devoid of his previous relaxed energy. He guided the van onto the exit ramp, the movement smooth and practiced. Yet, the air inside the car felt different. The climate control still hummed, but the bubble of contentment had been pierced. We were descending from the safe, predictable flow of the interstate toward something unknown, and the man beside me was no longer a relaxed vacationer. He was a soldier entering a potential engagement zone, his every sense suddenly on high alert. My innocent, logical request had pulled the first thread, and I was blissfully unaware that I was watching the entire tapestry of our life begin to unravel. The exit ramp curved gently, leading us away from the high-speed anonymity of the highway and into the more revealing light of a local access road. The landscape shifted from a blurred green expanse to defined, somewhat worn-down details. A cracked sidewalk, a dented guardrail, weeds stubbornly growing through the asphalt. Up ahead, a cluster of buildings came into view, exactly as advertised on the highway sign. It was a perfectly standard, slightly tired-looking roadside stop. A gas station with flickering fluorescent lights in its sign, a fast food joint with a drive-through, and a low-slung motel with a vacant office. It was the kind of place you forget 5 minutes after you leave. "Okay. Perfect," I said, already unbuckling my seatbelt with a relieved sigh. Gas station first. Quickest in and out. I began mentally compiling the list. Bathroom, maybe a bottle of water, a bag of chips for the kids. That's when it happened. The change in Mark was not gradual. It was instantaneous and absolute, like a switch being flipped. The relaxed posture he'd maintained for hours vanished. His shoulders snapped ramrod straight, his spine locking into a rigid line. His hands, which had been resting lightly on the wheel, now gripped it with a white-knuckled intensity that looked painful. His head didn't turn. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed ahead, but I could see they weren't seeing the road anymore. They were scanning, assessing, darting minutely from the rearview mirror to the side mirrors and back to the road ahead with a frantic military precision I had never seen in him before. "Don't stop here." The words left his mouth. They were low, guttural, and utterly devoid of the warm, familiar tone I knew. This wasn't a suggestion or a husband's casual opinion. It was a command. It was sharp, cold, and laced with a pure, undiluted fear that was so foreign to him it made my own breath catch in my throat. It was the voice of a stranger. The sheer force of it, the shocking disparity from his mood just seconds before, left me stunned. For a second, I just stared at his profile, my own hand frozen on the seatbelt buckle. "Wah, Mark, what are you talking about?" I finally managed, a nervous laugh escaping me, trying to puncture the sudden, oppressive tension. "Lily's about to have a meltdown. I can see the parking lot. It's fine. It's just a gas station." He didn't look at me. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see a muscle twitching in his cheek. He was breathing differently now, shallow, rapid breaths through his nose. "Emily, don't. Stop. Here." He said my name. He never used my full name unless it was serious. But this was beyond serious. This was primal. Each word was bitten off, a stark, separate entity of pure warning. The van, still rolling forward toward the turn-in, suddenly felt like a vulnerable metal box. The cheerful classic rock still playing from the speakers now sounded like a grotesque, mocking parody of our situation. The air in our climate-controlled bubble turned icy. My confusion began to curdle into something else. A low, cold trickle of alarm. This wasn't about the cleanliness of the bathrooms or the quality of the snacks. This was about something else entirely, something dark and terrifying that only he could see. And in that moment, the first real, genuine fear of the day began to bloom in the pit of my stomach. The silence that followed his command was louder than any sound. It was a physical presence, thick and heavy, pressing in on us from all sides. The cheerful guitar solo from the radio now felt like a violation, a screeching intrusion from a world that no longer existed. With a movement so sharp it made me jump, Mark's hand shot out and stabbed the power button, killing the music mid-note. The resulting void was deafening, filled only by the hum of the engine and the frantic, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the turn signal he had yet to cancel. The van continued to coast, slowing but not stopping, as we neared the entrance to the gas station. We were close enough now to see the details. The price of regular unleaded, a flickering open sign in the convenience store window, a few cars parked haphazardly at the pumps. It all looked so mundane, so utterly normal, and that was the most terrifying part. The dissonance between the banality outside and the sheer, unvarnished panic inside our car. I finally found my voice, but it was a thin, reedy thing, barely a whisper. "Mark? Honey, what is it? What's wrong?" My eyes darted from his stone-like profile to the world outside and back again, trying to find the source of his terror, trying to make the two realities connect. They wouldn't. He didn't answer. His entire being was focused on the scene ahead, his eyes performing a frantic, silent reconnaissance. I saw his gaze lock onto the convenience store window, then snap to the parked cars, then scan the perimeter of the building, his pupils dilated. He was looking for something, or someone. The easygoing father and husband from 10 minutes ago was gone. In his place was a man possessed by a ghost I didn't know. His face was pale, a sheen of sweat visible on his temple despite the cool air blowing from the vents. Every muscle in his body was coiled, tense, ready to spring. This was a man braced for impact, for attack. The children, sensitive to the sudden tectonic shift in the emotional atmosphere of their safe space, fell silent in the back. Lily pulled her headphones completely off, her movie forgotten. "Daddy?" she asked, her small voice tentative and scared. "Why did you turn off the music?" He didn't. Couldn't answer her. His focus was absolute. The normal rules of our family, the unspoken promise of safety and answers, had been suspended. The climate control was still running, but I felt a deep, internal cold seeping into my bones. The happy, sun-drenched family road trip was over. In its place was a cold, hard, and terrifying new reality, one governed by a fear I didn't understand and a man I suddenly felt I didn't know. The facade had not just cracked. It had shattered, and we were now exposed, raw and vulnerable, driving blindly into a nightmare only he could see. The van was now moving at a crawl, almost idling past the entrance to the gas station. Mark's foot was hovering over the accelerator, his entire body screaming the intention to flee, but some last vestige of normalcy, or perhaps sheer, paralyzing shock, kept us rolling forward for a few more agonizing seconds. It was in this suspended moment, this window between his warning and our escape, that my eyes, desperate to understand the source of his terror, finally focused. I scanned the mundane scenery, my heart hammering against my ribs. A man was pumping gas into a pickup truck, his back to us. A teenager in a uniform was walking out to collect trash, earbuds in, oblivious. Nothing. There was nothing here. And then I saw them. Not by the pumps, not near the bright, open storefront. They were half hidden in the shadowed alleyway between the gas station and the adjacent fast food restaurant, a narrow strip of concrete dominated by a large, greasy dumpster. Leaning against the grimy brick wall, partially obscured by the overflowing bin, was a figure. It was a man. He was tall and lean, dressed in a dark, worn leather jacket despite the heat. He wasn't doing anything suspicious. He wasn't skulking or hiding. He was just waiting. His posture was unnervingly still, a study in patience that felt completely out of place in the hurried, transient environment of a roadside stop. He held a cigarette loosely in his fingers, but he wasn't smoking it. It was just burning down, a long cylinder of ash threatening to drop. His face was turned slightly away, but I could see the sharp line of his jaw, the dark hair that needed a cut, the faint, pale line of a scar that traced from his ear down into his collar. He was staring off into the middle distance, but his stillness was not peaceful. It was the stillness of a predator, a coiled patience that was more threatening than any aggressive movement could ever be. He didn't look like a local. He didn't look like a traveler. He looked like an event, a consequence. My eyes were drawn to his hands. Even from this distance, I could see they were large, the knuckles prominent, with what looked like old, faded stains across the backs that could have been grease or something else. This was who Mark had seen. This was the source of the earthquake that had shattered our peaceful day. The man wasn't looking at us. He gave no indication he had even registered our van slowly rolling past. And that somehow made it worse. His waiting felt absolute, as if he had all the time in the world, and we were simply an appointment on his calendar that he knew would eventually be kept. In that single, chilling glimpse, I understood on a primal level that this was no coincidence. This was a meeting, and my husband had known it was coming. For a heartbeat, it was just a strange man in an alley. An unsettling sight, yes, but a disconnected one. A piece of a puzzle I couldn't comprehend. My brain scrambled to make sense of it, to file him away as a vagrant, a loner, anything that could explain Mark's reaction without unraveling everything. Then Mark made a sound, a low, involuntary gasp that was ripped from somewhere deep within him. It wasn't a sound of surprise. It was a sound of confirmation, a sound of pure, unadulterated dread. His foot, which had been hovering, slammed onto the accelerator. But in that split second before the engine roared and the van jerked forward, my eyes, wide with a dawning horror, locked onto the man's face as the turn of our vehicle shifted my perspective. And I knew him. The memory didn't come to me as a story or a name. It came as a sensory avalanche, a violent flood of associated feelings that turned my blood to ice. It was the particular way his eyebrow was slightly crooked from an old break. It was the cold, flat emptiness in his eyes, even in profile, that I had seen once before years ago in a photograph Mark had tried to hide, a photograph he'd nearly burned in a frantic, unexplained panic. This was the man from the photo. The one Mark had claimed was an old, bad memory from a life before me, a life he never spoke of. Someone I hope you never, ever have to meet, Emily, he'd said, his voice tight with an emotion I'd mistaken for simple regret. Asterisk, a ghost. Asterisk. He wasn't a ghost. He was flesh and blood, leaning against a dirty wall, waiting for us. My mind, reeling, made the connection with the force of a physical blow. This was no chance encounter. This was a planned interception. He knew our route. He knew our timeline. He knew we would have to stop here. The understanding was instantaneous and absolute. The cozy, insulated world of our minivan, of school plays and grocery lists and PTA meetings, evaporated. It was a fragile soap bubble popped by the sharp, brutal presence of that one man. The man in the alley wasn't just a person. He was the living, breathing embodiment of my husband's hidden past, and he represented a clear and present danger to everything in this car. To me, to Mark, to the two innocent children in the back seat who were now whimpering, sensing the tectonic shift in their parents' terror. My blood didn't just run cold. It froze solid in my veins. Every happy memory of our life together, every moment of trust, every shared laugh, was suddenly cast in a new, sinister light, all leading to this single, terrifying point on a forgotten stretch of road. The man in the leather jacket was the key to a door I never knew was locked, and he had just turned it, flooding our present with the horrors of a past I was never meant to see. The van surged forward, the sudden acceleration pressing me back into my seat. The world outside became a smear of color and light, but my eyes were locked on the side mirror, my reflection a pale, wide-eyed mask of shock. In the convex glass, I saw the figure in the alley. As our vehicle leapt away, he moved for the first time. His head turned, slowly, deliberately. He didn't startle or give chase. He simply watched us go. And then, he lifted the cigarette to his lips, took a final drag, and dropped it, crushing it under his heel with a deliberate, unhurried twist. It was a gesture of infinite patience and certainty. Said, "Asterisk, this changes nothing. I am not done." Asterisk. That small, casual motion was more terrifying than any shouted threat. It was the calm, practiced action of a man for whom this was routine. My mind, scrambling to catch up, began to connect the horrifying dots. Mark's expertise in situational awareness, the way he always chose a seat facing the door in a restaurant, his near-paranoid habit of checking and rechecking the locks on our doors at night, quirks I'd dismissed as him being a cautious guy, now screamed a different truth. They weren't habits. They were rituals of survival. Protocols. This man wasn't a random criminal. He was a specific threat. He was a predator and we were his prey. Mark's reaction wasn't one of general fear. It was the specific, bone-deep terror of recognized peril. He knew exactly who that man was and, more importantly, what he was capable of. The truth crashed over me. This was not a chance meeting. This was an ambush. He knew we would be on this road. He knew we would need to stop. He was waiting. The implication was a cold knife to the heart. Our lives, our movements were known. The playdates, the family vacations, the school run, had we been watched this whole time? Had this shadow been hanging over our picnics and birthday parties, waiting for the right moment to step out of the darkness? The danger was no longer an abstract concept. It had a face, a leather jacket, and a chilling patience. It was a threat that had bypassed all the safeguards of our suburban life, finding us in the most vulnerable of places. On the road, isolated, with our children in the back seat. My maternal instincts, a dormant force until now, ignited into a white-hot panic. This wasn't about a mysterious past anymore. It was about the immediate physical safety of my son and daughter. The man in the alley wasn't just after Mark. He was a threat to all of us, and my husband's sheer, unvarnished panic was all the confirmation I needed that this was a fight we could not win. We could only run. The van ate up the road, the engine whining with a strained pitch I'd never heard before. Mark was driving with a ferocious, single-minded intensity, his eyes constantly flicking between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, searching for headlights that might be following. The cheerful family vehicle had been transformed into a getaway car, and the man behind the wheel was a stranger I was trapped with. The silence between us was no longer just heavy. It was accusatory. It was filled with the deafening echo of everything he had never said, every deflected question, every vague answer about his life before me. The pieces, once scattered and ignored, now assembled themselves into a terrifying mosaic in my mind. The man in the alley was the central, horrifying piece. His face was the key that unlocked a decade of lies. I thought of the locked filing cabinet in his home office, the one he said contained old tax documents. I remembered the night, years ago, when a car backfired outside our apartment and he'd hit the floor, pulling me down with him, his body a shield, his breathing ragged. He'd laughed it off later, blaming an overactive imagination from too many action movies. I believed him. I thought of his complete lack of family. No parents to visit, no childhood friends who ever called. "It's just me, Em," he'd said with a sad smile when I'd asked. Asterisk, you and me, we're starting our own family. That's all that matters. Asterisk, I'd seen it as romantic, a clean break for a new beginning. Now, it felt like a meticulously constructed cover story. The man leaning against that wall wasn't just an enemy. He was a thread connecting to a whole other life. A life of violence. A life of running. Witness protection. A debt owed to dangerous people. A former accomplice seeking revenge or silence. The possibilities unspooled in my mind, each one more frightening than the last. The easygoing, loving man I had married, the man who coached t-ball and burned pancakes on Sunday mornings, had a doppelganger. A shadow self who knew how to spot an ambush from a quarter-mile away, who recognized the specific silhouette of a threat in a darkened alley, whose first instinct wasn't to call the police but to flee. He had not just kept a secret from me. He had built our entire life upon a foundation of lies. Our marriage, our children, our home. It all existed in the sanctuary he had carved out. A sanctuary I now realized was under a threat he had always known was real. He had chosen to bring me into this, to bring our children into this, without my consent, without my knowledge. The trust that had been the bedrock of our relationship shattered into a million pieces, cutting me from the inside. I was married to a man whose true biography was a mystery, whose real name I might not even know, and whose past had just parked itself at a roadside dumpster, waiting to collect him. The father of my children was a fugitive, and I was an unknowing accomplice, racing down a highway with my precious, terrified family, completely unprepared for the war that had just found us. The man I loved was a stranger, and the life we had built together was a beautiful, elaborate cage, and he had just shown me the predator circling outside the bars. The moment the van's tires found traction on the main road, our world shrank to the confines of the vehicle, hurtling through a landscape that had turned hostile. Mark's hands were locked on the wheel, his knuckles bone-white. He wasn't just driving, he was executing a maneuver. He pushed the van far beyond the comfortable cruising speed we'd maintained for hours, the engine roaring in protest. His eyes were perpetually in motion, a frantic dance between the road unfolding before us and the rearview mirror, searching for any sign of pursuit. He took turns too fast, the force pushing me against the door. He ran a yellow light so late it was practically red, not with recklessness, but with a calculated desperation that was far more frightening. This wasn't the Mark who diligently obeyed traffic laws and chastised other drivers for being careless. This was a man operating on pure, ingrained instinct. "Mark, slow down. You're going to get us killed." I finally cried out, my voice trembling, one hand braced against the dashboard, the other instinctively reaching behind me, a futile gesture to shield the children. He didn't even look at me. "Put your seatbelt on," he commanded, his voice flat and hollow, devoid of all emotion except a chilling focus. "Now, Emily." The sound of my name in that dead tone was more effective than a shout. I fumbled with my seatbelt, clicking it into place with shaking hands. In the back, the children were crying in earnest now, not just confused whimpers but full-bodied sobs of fear. The violent acceleration, the sharp turns, their father's terrifying silence, and their mother's palpable panic had shattered their sense of security completely. "Mommy! Daddy! What's happening?" Lily wailed. "It's okay. Baby, it's okay," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. My voice was thin and strained, utterly unconvincing. I couldn't tear my eyes away from Mark. He was a stranger, a cold, efficient machine where my husband used to be. He finally spoke, his words clipped and rapid, meant for me alone. "Get your phone. Open the maps. Find me a route that doesn't use the interstate. Back roads. The smallest roads you can find. Now." The order was so specific, so practiced, it stole my breath. This was a protocol. He'd thought about this. He had a plan for this exact scenario. My hands shook so violently I could barely unlock my phone. The cheerful, colorful map app felt like a relic from another life. I zoomed out, my vision blurry with unshed tears, looking for the thin, gray lines of county roads weaving through the emptiness, away from the exposed, predictable artery of the highway. The relaxing road trip was a distant, mocking memory. We were fugitives now, fleeing an enemy I didn't understand, guided by a man I no longer knew, down roads that led away from safety and deeper into the terrifying unknown of his hidden past. The only thing that was clear was the command thrumming through every fiber of his being. Run. We drove for what felt like an eternity, but was likely only 20 minutes, before Mark's white-knuckled grip on the wheel eased by a fraction of a degree. He turned onto a narrow, unmarked road that cut through dense woodland, the canopy of trees closing over us like a tunnel, offering a fleeting, illusory sense of shelter. The van slowed to a legal speed, the normalcy of the action somehow more alien than his previous frantic racing. He was blending in again, becoming invisible, another skill from a toolkit I never knew he possessed. The initial heart-pounding terror began to recede, leaving in its wake a vast, hollow silence filled with things unsaid. The children, exhausted from crying, had fallen into a fitful, tear-stained sleep in the back. Their quiet, hiccuping breaths were the only sound besides the hum of the engine. The normal, comforting sounds of our road trip, the music, the laughter, the squabbles were gone, replaced by a void of unanswerable questions that screamed in my mind. Who was that man? The face from the alley was burned onto my retinas. Was he a former partner? A creditor? A lawman? The possibilities were a gallery of horrors, each more terrifying than the last. How did he find us? The question was a virus, infecting every happy memory of our past. That spontaneous day trip to the zoo last month, had we been followed? The family photos I posted online, had they used them to track us? Had there been a tracker on our car this whole time? The paranoia was a poison, and Mark had injected me with it. What does he want? Revenge? Money? Silence? Was the threat just to Mark, or was it to all of us? My eyes darted to the reflection of my sleeping children in the rearview mirror. A fresh wave of icy fear washed over me. Were they safe? Would they ever be safe again? And the most devastating question of all, the one that made me feel like I was married to a ghost. What has my husband been hiding? The man sitting beside me, the father of my children, was a carefully constructed fiction. I had shared a bed with him, built a life with him, and I did not know him. Not at all. Every moment of our marriage was now under review. Every smile, every promise, every hardship faced together, now suspect. Was it all a lie to maintain his cover? Was I just a convenient prop in his fabricated life? I stared at his profile, at the man I loved more than anything, and felt a devastating loneliness. The trust that had been the foundation of our 13 years together was not just broken. It had been vaporized. We were hurtling down a dark, unknown road, and the map to our future was written in a language of danger and deceit that only he could read. I had no idea where we were going, what we were running from, or if the man next to me could ever truly bring us to safety. The road trip was over. We were now on the run, and the only thing I knew for certain was that our old life was dead, and a terrifying new one had begun in the shadow of a stranger at a gas station. The silence in the car was a physical weight. It pressed down on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. Mark's focus remained absolute, his eyes constantly scanning the empty road behind us through the mirrors. He was a watchman on a fortress wall I hadn't known existed, and I was trapped inside with him. The initial, heart-pounding adrenaline had faded, leaving a cold, sickening dread pooling in my stomach. My mind, freed from the immediate panic of the escape, began its terrible work, picking apart the fabric of our life together with the sharp, cruel needle of this new reality. Every vacation we'd ever taken, had he chosen remote locations not for their beauty, but for their isolation? Every time he'd insisted on a ground-floor hotel room, for the easy access. Was it really for a quicker escape? The junk phone he kept in a drawer, the one he said was for old work contacts. Did it have a number only one person could call? The questions were a torrent, and each one carved away another piece of the man I thought I knew. The father who taught Lily to ride a bike, who patiently helped Ben build elaborate Lego castles, who held me during thunderstorms. That man was a persona. A beautiful, loving mask worn by a stranger with a history so dark its shadow could reach out and snatch us from a sunlit highway. I looked at his hands on the steering wheel. Those hands had held mine at the altar. They had cradled our newborn children. Now I saw them for what they truly might be. The hands of a man who knew how to fight, who knew how to run. "Mark," I said. My voice was a rasp, unfamiliar and raw. He flinched, just slightly, as if pulled from a deep, dark well of thought. He didn't look at me. "Not now, Emily," he said, his voice low and thick with a fatigue that went far beyond a long drive. It was the exhaustion of a man who had been waiting for this day for years. Asterisk not now. Asterisk. The words were out before I could stop them. A choked whisper of disbelief. Our children are terrified. I just saw a man who looked at us like, I couldn't finish. I couldn't give voice to the predator I'd seen in that alley. I know, he said, and the sheer, unadulterated pain in those two words was enough to silence me for a moment. It was the first crack in his armor, a glimpse of the profound anguish beneath the steely focus. He knew exactly what he had put us through. He knew the terror he had unleashed. Who was he? I asked, the question hanging in the air between us, fragile and immense. He was silent for so long I thought he would never answer. The only sound was the tires on the pavement and the soft, sleeping breaths of our children, the innocent casualties of a war they didn't know existed. Finally, he spoke, his eyes never leaving the road ahead, his words barely audible. His name is Silas, Mark said, and the name fell into the car like a stone. It was a real name, giving a terrifying shape to the ghost. And a long time ago, before any of this, he gestured weakly around the car at our life. I made him a promise I had to break to become the man you married. He's not here to remind me of it. He took a shaky breath. He's here to collect. The name Silas hung in the air between us, a dark and solid thing. It was no longer a phantom. It was a name with weight, with history, with a claim on the man sitting beside me. A promise. The words echoed, each one a hammer blow to the foundation of our life. What kind of promise could inspire such fear? What kind of man was sent to collect on it? The road unspooled before us, a gray ribbon through an endless sea of anonymous trees. Every mile marker we passed felt like a monument to my ignorance. I had memorized his favorite coffee order, the way he hummed in his sleep, the specific sigh he made when he was tired but content. But I did not know the name Silas. I did not know about promises that could send a man leaning against a dumpster in the middle of nowhere, waiting with infinite patience. My mind, reeling, snagged on a memory, a small, forgotten thing. Years ago, early in our marriage, Mark had woken from a nightmare, drenched in sweat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I'd held him, asking what was wrong. He'd clung to me, murmuring something into my shoulder, something I'd written off as nonsensical sleep talk. Asterisk the ledger. He always settles the ledger. Asterisk I'd smoothed his hair and told him it was just a dream. Now, the words came back to me with the force of a prophecy. The ledger. Silas was here to settle it. Collect what? I whispered, the question tearing from a place of raw vulnerability. The possibilities were a void opening up beneath my feet. Money? Something else? My hand went instinctively to my wedding ring, a gesture that suddenly felt foolish. Was any of it real? Or was I just part of the cover, a wife and children added to his disguise to make him look like a normal, settled man? The thought was so devastating I physically recoiled. Mark finally, slowly, turned his head to look at me. The raw anguish in his eyes was a shocking contrast to the steely resolve of minutes before. He looked utterly shattered. Emily, he began, his voice cracking. The life we have, you, the kids, it's the only real thing. The only true thing I've ever had. Everything before was a different world. A dark one. I left it behind. I swore I'd never let it touch you. He was pleading with me with his eyes, begging me to believe him, to understand the impossible chasm between the man he was and the man he had been. But it has touched us. My voice rose, sharp with a pain that edged into hysteria. I glanced into the back seat, at our sleeping children, and forced myself to lower it to a frantic, desperate whisper. It's in this car right now. That man, Silas, he looked at us. He saw the kids, Mark. He saw them. I saw the truth of my words hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't just been running from his past. He'd been trying to outpace it, to build a wall between it and the family he'd created. And he had failed. The wall had crumbled, and the darkness had poured in. He looked back at the road, his jaw tightening again, but the emotion was different now. It wasn't just fear for himself. It was a primal, terrifying fear for us. For me. For Lily and Ben. I know, he repeated, the words hollow. And I will spend every second of the rest of my life making this right. I will get us out of this. I promise you that. But his promises meant nothing now. They were currency from a country that no longer existed. We were exiles, hurtling through a gathering twilight, with a past named Silas somewhere behind us, and a future that was nothing but a question mark swallowed by the dark road ahead. The trust was gone. All that was left was the running, and the chilling, unanswerable question of what his promise had truly cost.